Okay, so for the last several weeks, I've been talking to you all about different topics that are universal to everyone going through a divorce, no matter where you live or whether or not you're male or female. Everybody faces these same pressing questions when they decide that it's time to move forward with what is almost always an extremely terrifying decision. So I've told you in the past, and I can't stress it enough, that you need to first and foremost move slowly. Don't feel like you've got to be under a time pressure for making any decisions. That's one of the nice things about choosing to stay out of the traditional divorce system. You don't have any deadlines on top of you, anyone forcing you to do anything at any given time. When it comes to a point where you're ready to move forward, you really need to do some homework in deciding who is going to get what and how those assets are going to be distributed among you. So first, you have to determine whether or not you want to rely on the rules in your state as to what is marital property or not marital property. Most places have something what's called equitable distribution, which means equitable, not necessarily equal, but what is fair under the circumstances. And then other states have something which is called community property, which is a much more, I think, straightforward, we're going to split everything down the middle. So you might certainly want to do some research and decide, if we had to go into the court system to decide how we're going to divide our assets, what is the court likely to do? Or then at that point, retain a lawyer or go consult with a lawyer who can advise you how the court in your state might really look at this. But if you're trying to stay out of the system, there's a really straightforward way that you can approach this. And the first consideration is the house. And that's what we talked about last week when we were saying, how do we decide if we can afford the house? Can one person afford to refinance it into their own name? But what I will say is, regardless of whether or not you decide the house is going to be sold or you're going to keep the house is usually the most significant asset that people have. And so really, all you have to do in deciding who gets what is to take an honest look at what your assets and liabilities are. Usually it's most straightforward to total up the value of all your assets first. I like to leave the debt aside for a second because there's lots of different creative ways you can address credit card debt, which is the most common. Student loan debt usually goes with the person who was the student, so that usually is not something that becomes a joint liability. But again, you can check in your state on the specific laws on that. But it's usually easiest to think of your financial picture as a puzzle. So you need a total first. And so if your total is $500,000 and that includes the equity in the house, you're going to next decide what percentage is fair. If it's a fairly short-term marriage or you have fairly equal earning capacities, then possibly 50-50 is fair. Some cases where it's a situation where the mom has been home for 10 years and is going to need some time to get back into the workforce, then maybe you guys agree that 50-50 doesn't really make sense because mom is going to need more of a nest egg as she's rebuilding her life and getting on more financially stable ground. Then maybe it's 55-45 in favor of the person who earns less money. The public policy reason behind that is because the system really does take into consideration the fact that the person who earns more money is going to recover much faster financially than the person who makes less money. even that is not a hard and fast rule. And one thing you'll notice is that there really are no hard and fast rules. You really need to consider everything. So if one of you makes less money, but the other person has agreed they're going to pay alimony for a certain number of years, and that alimony payments are going to, in fact, somewhat equalize your incomes, then that could impact how you divide the assets as well. So maybe now you're going to get alimony in a fairly substantial amount for a certain number of years. So now you can do more of a 50-50 distribution of the assets that you've acquired during the marriage. So those are the issues that you would have honest and compassionate conversations with your spouse about to decide, what are we going to do here? And so once you've decided on that figure, and just to make it easy, we'll say it's 50-50. That does not mean it's 50% of every asset. It's 50% of the total assets. So going back to a $500,000 pot of money, if the house equity is $250,000 of that, then maybe one person is only getting the house and everyone, and the other party is getting everything else. That's probably overly simplistic, because the person who's keeping the house might want to make sure that they have some liquidity there. So you're going to look at everything and basically start filling in the puzzle pieces. So if you want to have it so that everyone gets $250,000 as their nest egg when they're done this process, how does that look in terms of liquid assets? Some things are not liquid. That means you can't access them right now. And that might be a house or retirement funds. Some things you'd have to pay taxes on if you tried to access them right now. So the other consideration or other piece of this when you're trying to figure that out is, what would I actually end up with if I sold this at this moment? So in most cases, saying the party getting the house is getting $250,000 in equity, that's not a fair number unless that's what they would expect to net after the house is sold. So you'd want to think about that. If the party getting retirement funds is going to be in a position where they're going to need to liquidate some of those, then there's going to be tax consequences involved in that. And then that person is going to want to talk to a financial planner or talk to an accountant who can help estimate what those figures are going to be. And that will give you a really good idea of how we divide these assets so we're both getting an equal share of what's there after we have liquidated them. So that would be after cost of sale, after tax consequences. And it's really not as complicated as it sounds. You know, any real estate agent can estimate what the cost of sale is going to be for your house. Any accountant or financial advisor can tell you what your tax consequences are going to be if you, in fact, have to liquidate some retirement funds. So once you feel like you've got a clear picture of what your assets are, then it's really just a matter of filling in the pieces. It's obviously easiest as well if you start out by saying, I'm going to keep what's in my name and you're going to keep what's in your name. But that is not something that works completely, because in many cases, one party is going to have a retirement account of some sort or a 401k that's worth fairly significant dollars that will throw off the distribution if they were to keep it 100% on their own. So there's also rules in place that are easy to determine when it comes to how to divide 401k funds, IRA funds. All of those things have been addressed in various divorce regulations through the federal government, through your local tax and divorce laws. And so there's processes or procedures in place for how to do that. And someone like myself or a attorney in your area can easily tell you what you need to do to go about dividing those accounts. Even oftentimes the greatest resource is the human resources department at your employer. And they oftentimes have forms that they use and with all of their employees, that they say, look, all you do is fill out these forms, tell us what amount is being transferred, and we will split that account for you as you direct. So I know it seems daunting and scary just because there's a lack of information out there, and most people trying to get divorced or needing to get divorced haven't ever had to think about this. But you can rest assured that when you start to educate yourself, it's not anywhere near as complicated as you might fear when you're in a place of not knowing anything. So a little bit of education goes a long way in helping you move forward in a really productive and healthy way that doesn't involve fighting. And in most cases, it's always important, if you feel like you're getting caught up on the percentage, the biggest thing to think about is how much is each percentage point worth. So if you've got a $500,000 pot of assets and you're fighting over the difference between a 50-50 and a 55-45, 1 percentage point for you is going to be a fairly small amount of money. 10% of $500,000 is $50,000. So if you're going to be fighting over what's essentially $25,000, between the difference between a 50 and a 60% distribution, keep in mind you're going to pay almost all of that, if not all of it, to attorneys if you're fighting over it. So it usually makes sense financially for both parties to meet somewhere in the middle before you end up winning on paper and saying you're going to get 55% of the assets, but you walk away with actually less because you've paid so much of what you're fighting for to attorneys. I've heard stories of cases where after the case is over, home equity loans need to be taken out to satisfy attorney's fees and expert fees. I had a client once who was told by their attorney that they should go out and take out a second mortgage in order to be able to pay their fees and to continue fighting. And to me, that means that the case has gotten totally out of hand and that both parties are going to be just really hurting themselves more than helping themselves to continue fighting. So again, it's the philosophy of myself, and I think more and more people in the divorce field, that really coming to an amicable resolution is not only best for your emotional health, but it's actually best for your financial health as well. Fighting this out for a long period of time over what is usually a small percentage difference really doesn't do anything but enrich the pocketbooks of the lawyers. So keep that in mind when you are going through this process. You want to make sure that you're looking out for yourself and the health of your entire family, not just fighting for the sake of what that number looks like on paper, and making sure that it's not just the lawyers who are really benefiting from your emotional turmoil as your divorce case drags on. So don't be scared of the task at hand. Just take it one step at a time and start filling in those puzzle pieces. Decide on a fair percentage distribution between the two of you and just plug in the pieces one at a time. So if you have any questions for me or need more detail, feel free to shoot me a message on Facebook or email me at Regina DeAngelis at ftdivorcecoaching.com. Because I know we haven't talked about the liabilities piece of it here, the debt piece of it. There's a lot of creative things that you can do there as well. And in fact, sometimes one of the smartest things you can do is agree to take some of the assets and pay off some of the debt so that you're both able to move forward debt-free. And you might have a little bit of a smaller pocket of money, but you are on more stable financial ground because you're actually debt-free, and that really gives you some freedom moving forward. So definitely please share this with anyone you think might benefit from this little bit of information, and please certainly reach out to me if I can help you in any way. And I'll upload this to YouTube so you can find it there, and it'll stay on my Facebook page for now as well. So thanks so much, and I look forward to seeing you next time.